From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Last year, Colorado lawmakers passed an unusual law. It directed every county in the state to set up in-person voting for incarcerated people in jails, many of whom are awaiting trial and haven't been convicted of a crime. The new law is the first of its kind in the nation. It's an effort to support voting rights for a population that's often considered out of sight, out of mind.
There's a really strong argument for making voting available to incarcerated folks that has a lot to do with making people who are in jails and prisons feel a part of something, feel a part of the community.
Alex Burness writes for Bolts, a publication that covers issues of criminal justice and elections. He spoke with me about this in March. We're listening back to that conversation today. Alex told me that while people in Colorado jails could technically vote by mail ballot before the new law, in practice, almost no one did. And while some cities like Denver have supported voting in jails, Colorado's statewide initiative was groundbreaking.
Advocates felt like this law was needed because, as a general rule in Colorado and in this country, the local officials who would have influence over ballot access for people in jails, who I must reiterate, in almost every case are eligible to vote. These are people who are being detained, generally speaking, pre-trial. They have not been convicted of anything. Side note, but relevant in many, many cases, they are simply in these facilities because they don't have the money to buy their freedom via cash bail.
Right.
The local officials who oversee these facilities, generally speaking, do not make efforts to help people vote. That is because they are either apathetic about it or outright hostile toward it. The problem is, if that's your attitude, we know what actually happens, which is that people in jails don't vote. I'll give you a good example. The largest jail in Colorado, in El Paso County, holds up to about 1,600 people. And in the 2022 election, 0 people voted there.
Wow.
That isn't because people don't care to vote. It's because they didn't functionally have access, because the local officials there weren't really lifting a finger to help people make sure their registration was up to date, to help them obtain ballots, to help them cast those ballots. And the results spoke for themselves. 0 people in El Paso County, 0 people in Boulder County. I could go on. That's when these advocates took the idea to state lawmakers and said, let's just make this a mandate. And they succeeded.
Well, let's talk about how this worked. The November 2024 election was the first time Colorado's jails had polling locations set up for incarcerated people to vote. What kind of turnout did we see, and did it meet expectations?
I think it met expectations because the law basically said you have to set up a polling place in jails so that people can conveniently vote. And what do you know? When you do that, people vote. So I wasn't surprised by the numbers. The advocates who ran this program and pushed for the law weren't surprised. Colorado only had a few hundred people vote from jails in 2020 and 2022 each. That's out of about 6,000 people in each of those cycles who were eligible to vote from jail. In 2024, more than 2,300 people voted in Colorado jails.
Wow.
So in a period of 6 months from the law passing to the actual election being held, Colorado was able to increase its turnout in jails tenfold from 2022. It is both really impressive and remarkable, but not entirely surprising.
You interviewed someone named Tiffany Lee. She's a county clerk in La Plata County in southwestern Colorado. She was initially not a fan of the new law, but she had an interesting change of heart after their jail voting center was set up. What made her change her mind?
Tiffany Lee, who is the county clerk in La Plata County, which is where Durango is a good example of a clerk who, by her own admission, had not spent a ton of time thinking about jail voting prior to this, and who was really wary of this law. When the law was being debated in the State House, the opposition came primarily from local officials who said, we don't need this. People already can vote in jails if they want to, which we know isn't true. This is going to cost a ton of money, which isn't really true. Tiffany Lee, told me after the election this cost her about $200.
Wow.
This is going to be dangerous. The kind of folks who work in elections, poll workers, aren't going to want to go into jails. Well, unsurprisingly, 0 incidents were reported. So there was all this opposition, not from Lee herself, from other officials, but I talked to Lee about how it went, and she was literally moved to tears, that it was so powerful to her to see how much it meant to the folks incarcerated in Durango to be able to cast a ballot. In many cases, these are people who never voted in their lives. And being a part of facilitating that, Lee found, extraordinarily profound. And she's excited to build on this in the future. I heard this, by the way, from other officials who had varying levels of hesitancy heading into this program, who said, yeah, it went really, really well. And we look forward to keeping it going.
As you mentioned, Alex, the number of inmates who voted grew from about 230 to 10 times that, about 2,300. What did you hear about the experience from people who voted, and what did it mean to them?
It means the world to people. And I think folks who have not been excluded from democracy might not understand just how important that is, but incarceration can be a hugely isolating experience. And to be invited into the fray, to say your vote matters, your voice matters, to even be informed, hey, you have voting rights. A lot of people don't even know that. People think in many cases, because of a lack of public education by the state, because of misinformation in the news, people think, if I'm in jail, I just can't vote. And to be told, hey, that's not true. Come on down, cast a ballot. We'll help you. Your voice matters. I could not possibly count the number of times that I've talked to people who have voted from jails who have said, this meant everything to me. This was one of the best experiences of my life. Those are like literal quotes that I get from people. It means a lot to folks. Conversely, being excluded, which is the status quo almost everywhere in the country and has been the status quo in Colorado for years, makes people feel really bad. It really demoralizes them. It is a reminder that the state and society in general regard them all too often as an underclass, as undeserving of voting. And it's important to remember whenever we talk about this stuff, no matter what has gone on in these people's lives to land them in jail, they are, in most cases, eligible voters. It's not a question of, should they be allowed to vote? They're eligible voters just like anybody else.
Alex Burness is a reporter with the publication Bolts. He spoke with me in March about Colorado becoming the first state in the country to set up polling places in its jails last year. We'll have a link to Alex's story in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.